introduce Raffaella, and Bob is going to speak to you. So Raffaella has come from Italy, University of Turin, and Bob is coming from Manchester, University of Manchester, K&H Centre. And they're going to talk to us about human mummification. Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here today. I would like to show you an overview of the mummification project, Human Mummification project. We are developing with different colleagues from several parts of the world. The aim of the Human Mummification project is not only to study the mortuary phenomenon, but also to understand which changes, religious, political, economical, and technological have occurred in Egypt from the pre-dynastic to the Greco-Roman period. So it's a broad range of time. Of course, the goals are multiple, and we will work on the conservation of the specimens, which include histology, immunohistochemistry, and X-ray microscopy. Also X-rays and CT to understand which kind of mummification they underwent to. The date of the specimens, we do have relative dates, archaeological dates, but we want to have it confirmed through radiocarbon dating, because I will show you that there might be discrepancies between the dates. Then the chemical characterization of the embalming agents. We do have different recipes that were used in different periods. And we want to see if there is a change in the chronology and if there are changes between human and animal mummies. The textile analysis I will show you is providing relative data and is giving information also on the cultivation and on the industry of linen and cotton in ancient Egypt, especially in the Roman period. Then we have also the hair analysis and for the styling, but also for the lice parasites that might be found, and then the process of mummification itself, of course. And more interesting for you, because the Germans working on those specimens as well, is to understand which was the environment in different areas, which were the changes of climate, if some pathogens were introduced into Egypt through commercial routes, because there were a lot of exchange, especially when the products for mummification were introduced into the country. So we would like to see if it is possible to find human DNA and chart the origin of certain types of population in different periods, especially in the Greco-Roman one, and see which was the evolution of those pathogens. Were they able to find any? As I said, it is important to have the specimen dated and to understand which kind of treatment the body underwent to. If you have a look to the text of Egyptology, you will see that it's commonly said that Egyptians started to mummify the bodies into the Old Kingdom, so it means 2500 BC, and that they had learned to mummify these bodies because they had the opportunity to see the pre-dynastic ones, 5300 BC, it's a broad time lapse. And during the pre-dynastic period following the Egyptologists, the corpses were buried into shallow-pit graves into the desert sand. They could be wrapped into shrouds or straw mats or whatever, but in any case, that body were not treated with resins or oils. So there was a simple dehydration due to the hot, rapid dehydration due to the hot environment. So this mummification, which is a sort of soft tissue preservation, the decomposition of soft tissue, is hardenable in certain cases as well, guaranteed to preserve centuries. This is an example of a pre-dynastic mummy we do have in Torino, and we have to be careful in this case. It appears to be pre-dynastic or even earlier. But as you can see, the funerary equipment doesn't belong to him because this body was acquired in Egypt. So from times to times you can have a context which doesn't fit with the body. This is why we do need the radiocarbon dating of the body and of the objects that are associated to this body. We should also need to have a CT scan or X-ray, because here you see we have this depression, and some of our colleagues have interpreted it as a fracture that had heat. But we will have to see more in the next future. So, as I said, the Egyptologists said that mummification started during the Old Kingdom. And we do have evidence, it has been published in August 2014, that in the late phase of the Neolithic, which means 4500 BC onwards, and in Nakada 1, 2, 3, which are the different periods of the different phases of the pre-dynastic, there was a treatment, funerary treatment of death. And we have two different sites in Mostraghetto, which is located in the lowest part of the country, called Upper Egypt. And here, these bodies were found. They are skeletonized because they are not really very well mummified, but there was an attempt at mummification, and there are traces of textiles left with the hand, with the feet, with hair, and there was an amorphous material that was present, organic amorphous material that was present in these bodies. So this material was analyzed by chemistry, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and thermal desorption analysis were applied. And this analysis showed that there was a recipe was made by animal fat and plant oil. They found cholesterol and beta-acetosterol in these mixtures. We had these acid lipids that didn't come from the endogenous fat that are degraded. They were non-human fatty acid chains. But we are able to say that there are animal fat and plant oil, but that's not up to certain genes or the species. What has been found as well was the presence of pine resin, and pine resin was not endogenous to Egypt. This implies that already in the first phase of the Egyptian history, there was an exchange with the Eastern Mediterranean and with Levant, and these resin were used for the practice of mummification. Also, a natural source of petroleum was found, that this was coming from the Dead Sea, and use of the acacia plant. In general, our colleagues said that recipes that were used in the pre-dynastic period were the same that were used in the later period of the Egyptian history, and also the percentage of animal fat and plant oil are more or less the same, 76% against 74% that was seen in the Greco-Roman mummies. So there was essentially a small evolution from this point of view. Now, we can say that with this type of research, the view of the inception of mummification has now to be modified, because this result pushed the practice back of circa millennium, showing that the fundamental concept that were bringing the Egyptian to preserve the body were already present at the time. Regarding the period following the pre-dynastic, the early dynastic period, you have very few mummies which are preserved. In general, we have limited number of specimens. So we have a specimen in Torino. This is an early dynastic child mummy, 18 months old. He died of severe malaria. We identified the histidine-rich protein type 2 with immunological techniques. And you can see that the body was positioned in a flex position, prone with the arms at their sides. And they were laid into rectangular clay or wooden coffins. We were quite lucky because within the bandages we found 2 amulets, and one of them was showing a crevice, so we were able to ascertain the chemical composition of this mineral, which is a chrysocolla bead. And again, chrysocolla is not common in Egypt. Malachite is common, chrysocolla is not. And it was mined in cyanide. So we know again that there were exchanges between Jebediah and cyanide, and this was, let's say, middle class population. So they were not particularly wealthy. This is important to say, so the different level of population had access to different funerary treatments. In regarding the Old Kingdom, in the Old Kingdom we know that the process of evisceration started. This is the canopic chest of Queen Epiphanes, she was the mother of King Khufu. And sarcophage was found, but it was empty. whereas the canopic chest contained the different bases with the organs, and these organs were floating in a salt natron solution, and this gave rise to an idea which our colleague is bringing ahead, and this idea is that the salt natron bath was used during the different phases of mummification. Not all of our colleagues agree, and so we will have a discussion about this with Bob later. This is another example of Old Kingdom mummy. As you can see, during the Old Kingdom, there was this peculiar type of wrapping of the bodies. The extremities were singularly wrapped, and the body was trying to recreate a perfect image of the individual. So the face was painted, and also in case of mixed genitalia were indicated. Into the first intermediate period, we have a process of eviscerations that continues, whereas exciseration is not so commonly used. Here we do have mummy which comes from the Egyptian Museum. It's the first intermediate period mummy. We were able to perform histology in one of the muscle samples, and it shows that from collagen fiber have not preserved fairly. So we're not surprised that when metagenomics was performed, nothing was obtained from it, and very little quantities of human DNA were shown, and no pathogenic DNA emerged. This person, Geotinacta, is a peculiar case because it belongs to the first intermediate period, but it is one of the few cases of acceleration performed. The acceleration was performed, but the features, facial features, are benign in those of the Old Kingdom. So you have the textiles, and you have the face painted with details of the facial features that are present. So it's a sort of a transition. We have here the Middle Kingdom mummies. In the Middle Kingdom, this is a typical Middle Kingdom individual. You can see that the type of bandaging of the bodies changes from the spiral bandaging of the extremities with different extremities wrapped singularly. Here you have the body which is wrapped as a cocoon, and you have a fragmented cartonnage that is covering the head and the chest in the very beginning. Also here, histology was performed, and as you can see, the typical band, the pattern, the bandaging cross-section of the collagen fibers is completely lost. It should appear this way, and instead you saw how it is damaged. So during the Middle Kingdom, there were different types of mummifications. There were methods of evisceration. Sometimes there was exciseration, but it was not really common. This became common later on in the New Kingdom. And we do have a very peculiar type of mummification that was used in the region of Thebes and was associated to the women linked to the court of King Amentuhotep. In this case, they were first dried with the natron. Before being dried with natron, the body was brushed with the spices, and these were just to prevent the skin from the action of salt natron, which eats the flesh. And then the inner organs and the brains were left in situ, and enamels were applied. We don't know if cedar oil, juniper oil was used or turpentine, because no one was allowed to take samples and to analyze them. But we do know that this resulted in partial mummification. They tried to dissolve the lesion with a success that was only partial. Instead, the skin was very well preserved. We do have tattoos level with the arms and level with the abdomens. There are also differences in the arm position that rise in the Middle Kingdom, and we will see that later in the New Kingdom. We will have some positions which are always kept in case of women and in case of men. The second intermediate period is a difficult period because we have the Ixos, which colonized the country. It was a multiracial population that was coming from the Middle East, and we do not have Ixos mummies. So We don't know how the funerary practice differed from those of the Egyptian. What we do know, in general, broadly speaking, because again, we do not have many mummies dating to this period, we do have excervation and we do have evisceration. What we know for sure is that the position of the arms became standard. So we have women with the arms lying and the hands resting on their thighs, whereas men had the hands that were arranged to cover their genitalia. And you will see it in New Kingdom mummies. We have studied from the Egyptian Museum. In the case of the New Kingdom, here you see, this is the mummy of Seti I, the father of King Ramses. Here is Ramses II, and here is the son Merneptah. We do have different steps that were used during the New Kingdom. It's considered as the zenith of the mummification, especially the 21st dynasty. We will see one example of a mummy from the 21st dynasty. So we have this small incision that was performed on the left flank, and we do have the removal of the organs. So the body was dehydrated from one side, the organs at the same time of dehydration separately. The heart was left in situ as it was considered a sign of intelligence, and the soul should be entered inside the body into the next life, because the aim of mummification is to have a well-preserved body that will be reused into the afterlife. And the internal organs, after having been dehydrated, were placed into canopic jars that were associated to the body. We will see that in the Greco-Roman periods, the canopic jars disappear, or sometimes they are present, but they are empty. They just keep the religious significance. In some cases, and we will show you which ones, the brain was partially removed or was not removed at all. It depends. We do have several cases, but we'll show you a case of Neviri, and I will show you the mummies of Ka and Merit that are non-royal mummies. So the second part of the process was sterilization of the body. It was washed with palm wine, cedar oil. It depends. We do have a series of texts and accounts, historical accounts that were written from the 4th century BC onwards. So later, much later, after the end of the Egyptian dynastic period. And so the abdomen was filled with spices that had aromatic function. They were used to avoid the smell, but also they had antibacterial and antisepticidal properties, and the body was stitched up with beeswax. Then we had this protective coat that was made by a mixture of plant oil, of beeswax, resins, and spices, so that nature did not eat the flesh. And then, following Stephen Sparky's idea, the body was placed into hypersaturate salt natron solution, and it was left there to set. Other people instead think that the dry natron was applied to the bodies and was, as it became wet, it was changed and replaced by other natron. In any cases, either if you use the salt natron solution or you use the dry natron, the natron diffuses into the tissues and stabilizes the fats, and so it turns them into a more resistant form that is stopping, or in any case, it is slowing the process of decomposition. Again, if you believe into the theory of the natron solution, then the corpse was left dry, and then it was wrapped in linen bandages. And the same occurred for the inner organs. In the case of the use of dry natron, it was simply dried for the period that had been described in Herodotus text and in later text, and then it was wrapped. And this is, of course, the last time that the embalmers were seen the body. This is a study performed on 18th dynasty non-royal mummies. This is the head of Neviri. Neviri was the chief of the stables under King Thutmose I in 1474, 1424 BC. His tomb was found in the Queen Valleys in Luxor in 1904 by Schiaparelli and Missione Archeologica Italiana. His tomb had been looted in antiquity, so we just have the head of the baby and this canopic equipment. The rest of the body has been destroyed. The head is beautifully preserved, and it was originally wrapped in linen. This linen was treated with resins, and also his canopic equipment was beautifully preserved, apart one jar that was inscribed for Rabi, which is the guardian of the land. This jar is broken, and they allowed us to take samples from histology and to analyze the textile. So we performed CT scanning of this head, and Bob will tell us more about it.
Can you turn the lights out? You can't see it.
You can see it?
That's quite dark.
What should we do? Oh. So, yeah. So, Bob, would you like to come?
Oh.
Thank you.
Right, I'll ask you to talk amongst yourselves for a minute. So we can sort the technology out. I'm afraid I'm going to take the intellectual level down slightly now. You've heard the science, the microbiology, etc. My background is in fact one of a doctor. I used to be an orthopedic surgeon, and when I retired, I got interested in Egyptology. And my nice to get rid of this, isn't it? My interest is, in fact, in looking at the images of mummies, largely ancient Egyptian mummies. Now, not knowing the audience is a bit difficult. Do you all understand CT scanning? One nodding up and down, and the rest are, yeah, right, okay. Basically, as I say, I'm going to talk about CT scans of these mummies. Before that, just to reiterate what Raphael has said, why did the Egyptians mummify their dead? And the answer was they believed in eternity, they believed in an afterlife, and they believed that ideally you should have your body preserved for use in the afterlife. It was great when they could put the bodies into sand pits in the sand. The hot sand desiccated the body, it was preserved, and putrefaction was slowed and then prevented. Once they got sophisticated as a society, they wanted more sophisticated burial routines, which included a tomb and therefore a tomb chamber. No contact with sand, putrefaction could take place, they had to do something else. That something else actually was not recorded by the, excuse me for 1 minute, I thought that we would get this to work, but it was all set up to go. And classically, it won't. So, I have to start from scratch. So they had to find some way of preservation. We know about that. Unfortunately, the actual Egyptians themselves, and particularly the Obamas, did not leave any contemporary records. Our records about mummification are in fact those left to us by the classical authors, people like Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus. And fine. But you've got to remember that that's in the third intermediate period. All these records are from after the golden age of Egypt, if you like, the New Kingdom. And so they are snapshots at two particular times. And that's all we have. And they talk about, you all know this, brain was removed through the nose, iron hook, stirred around, ripped the brain out, incision on the left side of the flank of the abdomen, tear all the guts out, preserve those, put them either in canopic jars or whatever. And that was it. Herodotus does describe two other methods, one of which required a lytic chemical to be injected through the perineum, through the anus, into the abdomen to basically dissolve all the guts, and then they just pull the plug out, everything fell out, that was it. theoretically. Not quite like that. There has been a certain amount of experimentation in terms of mummification more recently. And in fact, it was Rickram did experimental mummification on animals. And when she used a lytic solution, it really did do quite a lot of damage to the body wall. So the whole concept of preferentially destroying the abdominal and thoracic organs, the trunk organs, with this enema and leaving the wall intact is, well, shall we say, fanciful? It may have worked, and maybe we don't know what they used, but certainly it's been very difficult to reproduce subsequently. So, why am I interested in the CT scan side of it? Well, the answer is, if I could make this computer work, it would be fantastic. The answer is that CT scans are purely a modern version of X-rays. X-rays, as you know, show you what the internal structure of the body is like. They are shadows, nothing more. They're merely shadows of those structures. You take a plain X-ray, you get a combination shadow of all the structures that the X-ray beam has gone through. The beauty of CT scans is that because of the geometry of it all, and because of the sophistication of the data collection, and subsequently the data handling and analysis, you can get 3D images. This is Nabiri's head. Now, the reality is, this is not real. This is purely a virtual picture. Nothing more. Now, if we go to the 2D images, and with luck, if I can get rid of that. Now, here you can see various structures within the head. Doesn't look very much, does it? Not very impressive. You can, and this is where it's very risky, because I am trying to do a demonstration live. You know what happens when you do live demonstrations. So, as I say, we can do a virtual post-mortem. Therefore, we can see what happened to the body, what structures were retained, what structures were damaged. Were they damaged? Can you tell whether they were damaged deliberately or accidentally? And the other confusing fact is that these people died. Their body was taken to the embalming workshop where it was, let's say, it was processed so that it would be preserved. And then a very, very important part of the procedure, the last half of it, would be the bandaging, which was accompanied by a lot of spells and magic, because it was necessary to invoke magic to make the body available and work in the afterlife. That was their belief. So the body was processed chemically and surgically, if you wanted a better word. Subsequently, you've had tomb robbery, you've had periods of unrest where mummies were actually deliberately removed by the priesthood from their original burial places, their tombs, and placed in, transported and placed with care or otherwise in other places. You've subsequently had, from say the 19th century onwards, you've had a massive interest in Egyptology. People used to create their cabinets of curiosity. I mean, I've heard of a case where somebody in the 1800s, his honeymoon, he went with his wife to Egypt, and what did they bring back as a souvenir? A mummy. So that's the sort of attitude that people had in the 19th century towards mummies. They were not necessarily treated very well. Subsequently, even in the 1960s, you find mummies that were in museums, and the curators decided they would analyze them. So they poked around and dropped a bit here, and did various things, and destroyed an awful lot of mummies had been destroyed by handling. So here we are in the 21st century, I believe. What we want to do now is to do a lot of our analysis with minimum interference, because we have a cohort of artifacts which are very precious. They are in danger of being diminished if we're not careful. That's the driving force behind my interest in these mummies and using CT scans. Now, we've heard about the various processes. I personally, having only seen about 70 of these mummy CT scans, am a bit sceptical about everything that's written. I think there was a significant amount of individual variation in the treatment during embalming in any era or any location. You've got different eras, you've got different locations, and there is an immense difference sometimes between them. The other thing is, although there was no national burial service or anything like that, people had to pay to have their relatives mummified. So there was only a certain level of society and upwards that were going to be mummified. Doesn't mean that you didn't have the odd Arthur daily and that corners weren't cut. And I suspect that there are an awful lot of variations which are due to people saving time, being idle, it's Friday afternoon, got to go, bye, and that sort of thing. So there is massive variation. You can detect certain patterns in certain era. They're fairly gross, and you may be talking, oh, well, in the New Kingdom, well, how long did the New Kingdom last? It's hundreds of years that such and such a practice was commonplace. Then you have the influence of, and here I actually fall into conflict, not with Raphael, but with other people. Well, how much influence was there when Egypt was invaded? Everybody thinks of ancient Egypt as being a single cohesive civilization. It was not. You had the Old Kingdom, which actually eventually destroyed itself economically. It cost more and more and more and more for the royals to be entombed, and eventually it broke the country. And meanwhile, power was being devolved, you've heard this recently, being devolved regionally. And so there was less and less cohesion. Then you have the Middle Kingdom, then you have the invasion from the Levant, the Hyksos. So you've got an influence from there. Go after the New Kingdom, leaving about a bit in history, I'm sorry about that. You go to the New Kingdom, after that, again, the New Kingdom faded out, as most eras do. Eventually you go through a cycle. And you first of all got invasion or strong influence from Libya, then Syria, then you go back and you get influence from Nubia, from just south of Egypt, where, fortunately, the Nubians had adopted the burial practices and the religion of the previous, the New Kingdom type from the Egyptians themselves, taking it down south of Nubia. They became powerful and invaded Egypt, and hey presto, you get a reversion back to a lot of the old religious and funerary practices. And you must remember, a lot of our knowledge of Egyptology is funerary, because believing in eternity, all of their funerary equipment, their architecture, the equipment, was made to last, and it has lasted. So we see it now. But their actual day-to-day living conditions were made quite temporary, and we don't really have much evidence of them. So there's a very heavy influence on funerary knowledge, shall we say. So, CT scans, back to CT scans, and what can we tell? And I'm just beginning to worry that I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this too easily for you, because this is just not behaving properly. No, it won't, doesn't matter. Basically, the amount of data we have from the CT scan allows us to use quite sophisticated software, better than the stuff on this laptop. But this is made for a laptop, and you can actually take that data, you can slice it any which way you like. So you can get a slice like this, which is axial, it is axial, it's transverse. Or you can take all that data and you can reslice it so that you get front to back, a sagittal view, or side to side coronal view. Or and you can actually turn the axes round so that it's not all strictly at 90 degrees to each other. You can twist it any which way infinitely. You can make 3D images, like I showed you originally. And those 3D images tell us quite a lot about things like dental status, the status of the jaws, whether there's been periodontal pathology, whether there's resorption of the bone around the teeth sockets and things like that. But what it does not do is tell you the detail of what's going on inside the body. It all looks very, very impressive, but it doesn't tell you all the detail. And this is the sort of detail you get, which is, unfortunately, because it's not working properly, it's typical. Here you see the nose, cheekbones here, these are the maxillary sinuses here. Oh, sorry, no, that is an orbit. Here you see the air sinuses at the back of the nose. You can see something within the nose itself. That's packing, that's linen. Whether or not that linen was actually impregnated with anything, we can debate. And here, going into the skull itself, you can see this is actually some of the remnants of, there's some brain and there's some linen in there. And what has happened here, which, as I say, I apologise because I don't seem to be able to get it to behave. It's not going to. You can reslice it and you can see, and you've got some pictures on here. As I say, it's absolutely classical. When you're trying to do a demonstration. Yeah.
And here we are.
Okay, fine, yeah. Just going to lower that, so hopefully get, these are some of the actual images in a minute, if this, right. If in doubt, use a big hammer. Here, you can see the dental status, okay? You can see the teeth. Things to note about the teeth here are something which is very usual, and that is that the crowns are worn down flat. They had a very abrasive diet, and the main dental pathology, until you get to probably Greeks and Romans influence, the main dental pathology was actual wear of the teeth to the point where the root cavities were exposed, and then you got infection, and then you got apical abscesses and all sorts of things. And here you can see the wear, you can see an abscess around here, the root, but here, something very, very unusual for a 18th dynasty mummy, and that is adjacent cavities. This is like modern caries, very, very unusual because we associate caries not with the sort of diet that they had. So these are the sorts of things you can see. The concept of going through the body and seeing how the body was eviscerated. In reality, it reveals a whole host of different things and unexpected things. Sometimes they would remove the lungs and maybe the heart, one way or another, but you all know about anatomy, pleura, pericardium, yes? Okay, so the pleura and pericardium would be intact, but the organs were gone. Not very often was the heart actually left in situ, nor it's difficult to tell whether it was replaced because Raphael has mentioned canopic jars, which are what it says on the tin. They are jars, they're external. But there was a phase when the viscera were processed, probably cleaned, desiccated, and they were then wrapped in packages, and those packages were put back inside the torso. Just say two more things and then I will shut up. The business about the brain, there are a whole variety of ways that the brain was treated. Nabiri, his brain was partly removed. Then you can see that it was, as per Herodotus's classical description, the way they got into the cranial cavity was through the top of the nose, through the cribriform plate. And there's a big hole there, and there is linen going through that hole and into the brain, which is quite unusual that you've still got linen there and you've still got some brain left behind. So it was a strange sort of acceleration. It was only partially done. Was it Friday afternoon? I don't know. Other times, the brain is completely removed. Sometimes the brain is left entirely in situ, and it wasn't just in the earlier periods of Egyptian history that it was left in situ. And when you get as far modern as the Roman period, we're talking what, 30 BC to 300 and something, nearly 400 AD, nearly. The Roman mummification processes are said to emphasize and concentrate on the external appearance. You look at them, they've got these beautiful rhombic bandaging formations with studs in the middle. You've probably all seen them. They may have portrait panels on the front, or alternatively, the Romans also, they had a wide variety of external mummy appearances. From, you heard mention of cartonnage, which is their equivalent of plaster of Paris and bandages, basically. You produce a cocoon around a straw former, then you cut it down the back, take the straw out, put body in, and that's your cartonnage. Now, they did quite a lot of cartonnage use, particularly with cartonnage helmets and masks. There are, I won't bore you, there were 2 or 3 other distinct styles of Roman bandaging. And it is said that they didn't do very much in the way of actual embalming. Well, this may be true, in that there are some very characteristic things that lack of excerebration is quite common. That is very common. Lack of evisceration is moderately common, but it does occur. But when you start looking at something like the chest wall, you find that the posterior end of the ribs, which articulate with the spine, and that costovertebral joint is a very, very strong joint. It's got a lot of ligaments involved in it. A lot of these cases have got disruption of that joint. No fractures necessarily, but disruption of that joint. Very peculiar. And the other thing, of course, is if they were so damned careless about their embalming, how come we've got so many Roman mummies still here 2,000 years later? They can't have been that bad. So, there are a wide variety of approaches to embalming. And I think we're only just starting to look at this. CT scanning can help an enormous amount in that you can do a lot of careful research on the images, no damage to the mummy. However, obviously, it's got certain drawbacks. The first drawback is you can actually kid yourself. You can actually use this but quite powerful software. You can actually, just by moving the wheel a little bit, altering the contrast, you can make a whole appearance still. So you can tell yourself that there's been transnatal excerebration when there hasn't, purely artifactually. The other thing is, obviously, it does not provide you with any physical specimens. So anything like carbon dating, immunology, DNA research cannot be done via the medium of CT scanning. But at least it can help you in terms of knowing exactly where your target should be if you want to go and take specimens, so you can be far more controlled, and as I say, far more targeted. I think that's all I want to say. It's a massive subject. We could talk about it all afternoon. But as I say, my particular interest is in the imaging side of it. It's very good. It's improving almost year by year. Every couple of years there's something new. A CT scanner now produces thin slices. The images are, well, the usual is 0.6 of a millimetre. Go back 25 years, you're talking of a centimetre. So that's the difference in detail you get. Plus, because the CT scanner does not use X-ray film, it uses detectors, like your CMOS detectors in cameras and so on. It uses rows of detectors. The initial CT scanners in 75 had 1 row of detectors. We're now up to, actually I heard 2 days ago, we're now up to 256 rows of detectors. So it gives you an impression of scale, of detail that we're arriving at. And that is going to continue. I am certain of that. There will come a time when it ceases to develop, because what drives CT scanner development? Medical diagnosis. So you get to a point where you will get no further benefit from greater detail. So that is what will actually cease the drive to more and more and more detailed and sophisticated scans. Okay, I've bored you long enough. Thank you very much indeed. And, well, we're going to take questions or what?
Okay, so you heard about the CT scan of the Miri. Here we happens. Okay. So Bob told you, should I go in details? Are you interested in knowing more about the type of acceleration? Should I go further because we have just 15 minutes left? Yeah. So we essentially can see that there was a partial acceleration here, that the nose was filled and the cheeks and the tongue were filled just to produce an image that reminds very much the person in his life. And here you can compare with the kind of mummification that was used for King Seti the First. It is different because here you have an almost complete transnasal acceleration with different layers that are represented by linen, they're represented by soil, as the author said, and by the presence of dehydrated brain. In the case of Nabili, you just find a trace of resins of linen that was present in the occurrence, but for the rest, no traces of resins was present inside the skull. What was interesting us the most was that one of the jaws broken, as I said before, and we did the histology of this lung fragment. And the lung histology showed that this person had suffered of chronic cardiac insufficiency that was due to the deposition of hemosiderin pigments in the macrophages. But what was even worse is that there was this massive distension of the alveoli, which resulted in this intraalveolar edema, which is considered to have been the cause of death of the person, so an acute cardiac failure. The presence of focal electrochosis is not a big finding because we do know that these particles, of course, are present in the mummies and lungs of mummies of different time periods and from different countries. So they are just linked to inhalation of this particle in room where ventilation was poor. We tried recently to ask a colleague of ours to do the 3D surface reconstruction of the brain of Nabili that is based on the morphology of the endocrinium, just to see if there were major changes in the surface of the brain, which is not the case. We just have the symmetry of the hemisphere, which is normal, as well as the different vascularization of the meningeal vessels. This is nothing pathological here. Our colleague pointed that here we do have in the right so-called ear crease, and this is in some cases, 75% cases, associated with acute coronary attack. Now we can of course rely on diagnosis on the presence of this that might be due to also the process of mummification, but the fact that we do have this yellow crease and we do have the histology which proves that indeed this person died from an attack can be supportive of our diagnosis. There was a series of experiments that were performed on the lung, on the skin, and on the textiles. This was made in parallel to histology just to prove that we were working with lung tissue, and indeed the substances that were found are coming from hydrolyzation and degradation of the original lung tissue. We also tried to understand if the recipe that was used to embalm the head and the lungs and to treat the textile was the same, and indeed it was. And it was formed or constituted by animal fat plant oil, and it was mixed with these aromatic plant extracts with this conifer resin that was antibacterial and insecticidal properties, and with pistachio resin. Both pine resin and pistachio are coming from abroad because they don't grow in Egypt. And we do see that specifically pistachio resin is important for the color it has. It is a red color. And this color is associated to ancient Egyptian, to the cult of the sun god Ra. So it is important both in terms of preservation, because pistachio was used to heal wounds, to treat eyes, sores, and so on. But it was also used with this religious significance, which was linked to growth, to rebirth, to regeneration. So we had both significance in the use of these substances. Bitumen was what used, and we didn't expect to find it, and neither beeswax was present. Whereas in the case of Car and Merit, we will see that there are different embalming recipes. These two were husband and wife. He was a royal architect. He worked on the 3 distinct pharaohs between 1424 and 1380 BC. They were unearthed in there in Medina, was the village where the artisan building the tombs of the pharaohs worked. And this is one of the few complete furnished tombs that have been preserved from the Middle Kingdom, from the New Kingdom. So we can learn and appreciate which techniques were used to construct different parts of their houses, as well as part of their funerary equipment. This body had been CT scanned in 2001, but just a few images have been given to the museum, and the full set of CT scanning was not available to other researchers. So we had to X-ray the bodies and lost a series of information, important information. What we do know is that neither Car or Merit had been celebrated or eviscerated. It was told that in general they had received a poor mummification, and that this process was performed in haste, simply because it was not the normal way that is described in the text. As Bob said, we do have different types of treatments that varies from site to site. In this case, apparently, based on what the others said, there was no removal of the brain and no removal of the internal organs. So we are unable to explain how the organs dehydrated without starting of putrefaction, and how they preserved in such an intact manner. It is almost impossible that some simple treatment with resins in the outer side of the skin determines such beautiful preservation. The biochemical investigation showed that there were 2 different recipes used for Car and for Merit. We were unable to take soft tissue samples, of course, because the mummies are perfect. And again, we have the same type of recipe we saw in Nabiri. And in this case, instead of having pistachio, we have acacia, which grows in Egypt, and it was used as a glue that was smeared under the bandages, and the coniferous resin that is used for the antibacterial properties. Plus, the salt natron was used either in the dry form or in the solution form. We still have to ascertain this. If we had access to the CT scan, the original CT scan, we would be able to tell you more about this. So we have this plant gum, which is described in the Herodotus, which is acacia. We will see that it will appear commonly as part of the funerary equipment as well, as are made in acacia. This is the body of Merit. She died young. She was 25, 30 years old when she died. She was smaller than Nabiri, and the sarcophagus was not ready when she died. It was unexpected. She was, the sarcophagus of Car was used, and all textiles were placed within the coffin and just to fill the empty space. This determines poor preservation of the skeletal remains. Here, as you see from these images, the spine is being completely dislocated, and there are also the rib cage, which is completely broken. What we know is that indeed the brain was left in situ, as well as the other organs. So again, the problem is to understand how she preserved The external wrappings shows two different types of recipes: the presence of fish oil, which is coming from the tilapia fish, which is common fish into the Nile, and also this has a ritual significance because of tilapia bears the offsprings into a mouth, so this is linked to a sort of rebirth and regeneration process. And then we have a balsam aromatic plant, the plant gum, and the presence of resins. And for the first time, beeswax that was used as an hydrophobic barrier. The radish shroud was treated also with another substance, which is viagra, and this is important as a component because it appears only in the New Kingdom, and it is not mined in Egypt, but it's coming from Asia Minor. So again, it reflects that there were currencies and exchange with those areas. We will see that the composition of the shroud, the recipe used to treat the shroud, was again different from the one used to treat the wrappings. We do have fish oil, so tilapia oil, that was used together with resin, beeswax, and pistacia. Acacia was not used for that anymore. At this stage, whereas pistacia had the symbolic significance. In all the specimen landmarks so far, bitumen was never found. So what we saw by analyzing both the heads of Nebiri and of Chimeric, that the recipes were similar, but there were changes that were linked probably to the significance, symbolic, ritual, religious significance of each of the individuals that were involved. In particular, we have to bear in mind that mummification changes from site to site. For instance, in Deir Medina, where Ka and Mary come from, virtually there are no canonic jars linked to the 18th dynasty, so all the people working there were involved in the same manner. It is important that we identify how this was achieved, because most of them are preserved this way. The point is that there are very few non-royal mummies which have preserved them. And so it is difficult to understand which practices were used. After the end of the New Kingdom here, we have the 21st dynasty, which is the fairly intermediate period, when the bodies, it is described as the zenith of the mummification. So the environment played with flesh, or manipulating flesh, and they started with different types of substances, and they were also painted with different colors in men and women. So we do have some kind still of exaggeration, and in these cases, instead of being placed into the kind of jar, the organs were replaced into the body, so they were wrapped and the texts were replaced inside the body. In the later Hellenistic period, we have a change. Bob already told you about the mummies of the Roman period. Essentially, the viscera, when they were removed, they were no more introduced into the body. They were left in the legs, or they were placed between the legs. The most important stuff was represented by the kind of wrappings they used. He already told you about the textiles, so the rhomboid textile, and the use of the cartonnage. And this period, acceleration was completely abandoned, and then Islam was introduced. No more mummified bodies were found. These are the portraits from the Fayoum, and it is interesting because we are currently studying textiles from the late Roman period, which are coming from the oasis. In general, it was thought that the introduction of cotton was made by the Arabs and was spread in the Western Mediterranean as they were spreading. It has been shown that in Egypt, in the oasis, in particular in Cairo, there was this tradition of cultivation and weaving of the cotton. So we had a cotton industry that was very well established in Sudan, and then also established in the oasis in Cairo. It is important because there is a change in spin direction between the Neolithic and the pre-dynastic and the rest of the Egyptian history. there is a change from the Z direction, which is a clockwise direction in the spinning, to the anti-clockwise, which is the S direction. The S direction will be present during all the Egyptian history, and when we found it, we know that these have been locally produced. All the type of textile that have been imported have the other direction. And we also have a very important finding, which is the presence of a union of linen and cotton. These have been described only in text. Pollux in 2nd century had described the presence of this type of union, but no one had found it so far. When it is used, in general, we do have flax that is used as a warp and cotton is used as a weft. And our colleague is studying this textile with polarized light microscopy, and so you can see the different shapes and the fiber details that cannot be seen in scanning electron microscopy, but you see only the surface. So more studies are carried out on these specific topics, textiles, on resin, and on inner organs to better understand the type of evolution of mummification in the different periods. It's a huge, it's a broad argument, and we do have very little details about it. Thank you very much.